Proper Romance series is clean content, sometimes called closed-door romance, so it's suitable for all ages. These are not bonnet romances, there's no inspirational content at all. There's all the passion and longing you'd want in romance, but there's no onstage sex. These heroines are not damsels in distress awaiting rescue. They are mostly strong, capable women who have the rug pulled out from under them. Some have emotional upheaval or face issues like domestic abuse. Some have physical challenges like alopecia. Others are required to commit to loveless arranged marriages, and all live in times when they don't have agency over all their life choices. Their journey is first the search for self-acceptance, and then the search for true and unconditional love. If you're someone who is maybe not a regular reader of romance, I framed our presentation for something we have in common as librarians, booksellers, writers, and publishers. We are all students of human behavior. So throughout this presentation, I've peppered in quotes from some of the proper romance authors with their thoughts on what they think are the elements which make it easy for people to fall in love. Let's start with Sarah M. Eden. Her Dread Penny books are an interconnected universe of stories following the exploits of a secretive society of authors who are dedicated to helping the poor who are preyed upon by a notorious criminal mastermind in Victorian-era London. Each book in this universe is a standalone and features a different member of the society. They use their unique skills to navigate the dangerous streets of London, as well as the dangerous path of love. Interwoven throughout each book are two penny dreadfuls, which were popular sensationalized crime stories in this era, written by the characters themselves. The new book out this month is The Bachelor and the Bride. Meet Dr. Barnabas Milligan. In the book it says, quote, "London was not a place for the faint of heart. Fortunately for Barnabas Milligan, he'd stopped listening to that organ long ago," unquote. A few years before the story begins, he helped rescue Gemma Kincaid by marrying her in secret to protect her from her family, who were intent on keeping her working in the family business, grave robbing. Though Gemma hoped that a romance might blossom, Barnabas, orphaned at 12 and wary of love, vowed to her that their marriage of convenience would never be anything more. With evil threatening to destroy London, Gemma and Barnabas are forced to work together, but will they live long enough to reach their happy ending? PW in their review says the close-knit members of the Dread Penny Society add some fun, and Gemma's heart of gold is sure to win readers over. A plethora of secrets and a thrilling mystery make this fresh take on arranged marriage a treat. In March, we'll return to Western romance with Sarah M. Eden's Wyoming Wild, when a woman asks a hardened U.S. Marshal to join her fight for justice and rid a small town of her corrupt father, who is their sheriff. Here's a brief excerpt to give you a taste of the writing. Every day, the Wild West grew a little less wild, at least in John Hawking's corner of it. Hawk, as he was known, was the U.S. Marshal in Wyoming. He was focused and determined, dedicated to his work, and according to a saloon owner in Cheyenne, possessed a heart of stone. He thanked the man for that assessment and worn the label with pride ever since. Soft hearts didn't save lives. Coming in October is Nancy Campbell Allen's second book in Victorian proper romance, To Capture His Heart. This author does extensive period research, and setting and historical detail are very important for her books. She uses tools like Google Earth in her research because she can virtually walk down a street in England to get a feel for how her characters might see it. In this story, Eva is an independent photographer who is still healing from a past relationship, but she's secretly fond of Detective Nathan Winston after working with him, photographing his crime scenes. Nathan asks Eva for a personal favor. Would she be able to photograph his mother's legendary week-long dinner party and matchmaking event? The catch is that Eva would have to pretend to be courting with Nathan so he can avoid the many single women seeking his attention. A criminal from Nathan's past threatens revenge, so he must be extra vigilant to keep the partygoers safe. He confides in Eva, and as the two work together to apprehend the criminal, they find that they might capture more than they expected, each other's heart. Here's a quote from the book as they begin their adventure. He smiled and winked, and Eva wondered how she would possibly survive 10 days of the man's attention and emerge unhurt on the other side. If you love Downton Abbey, welcome to our first Edwardian proper romance. It was published recently, and this is a fascinating period of time as we move away from the corseted world of Queen Victoria as the new century brings a new king and a dizzying array of new inventions, like the petrol motor car, which plays a part in this story and gives women a taste of freedom. This is also the beginning of the women's suffrage movement, which is a sub-theme in this story. The female characters see the play Peter Pan in London and create the Wendy League to encourage, support, and uplift each other, to let their spirits fly in a time when men made decisions which controlled nearly every aspect of women's lives. A timely topic, to be sure. Here's insight from Krista Jensen about the story. Quote, "Powerful chemistry and a sense of wonder contribute to their initial attraction. They are truly interested in each other, but need to uncover who the other person is inside as part of falling in love. The other important element is their banter, its flirtation, intelligence, curiosity, and its humor." Here's an example of dialogue from the book. This is between the male suitor, who is an innovator, Spencer, and the more traditional and protective brother of the protagonist. Spencer recalled how much he'd enjoy the quick and unorthodox banter of the ladies last evening. "I found them delightful." George nearly spit out his food. "That is because there were only two of them, neither was your own sister, and they were not bent on emasculating you where you stood." "Ah," answers Spencer, "I can see how that could be not delightful." All four other men lifted their various cups. "Hear, hear." Next up is Megan Walker's February Regency title, Miss Newberry's List. The writing style has been described in reviews as making you wish you were born 200 years ago, in terms of the courtly manners, knowing how to flirt, and being charming. The story is about a woman who is bound by an agreement to marry a duke who she has only met twice. The union will elevate her family's status to dizzying heights, even though it's not a love match. But before her wedding day, she wants to secretly complete a bucket list, which serves in the story as a way for Roz to understand herself better as she lives out her dreams. She enlists the help of her best friend, who brings along her cousin Charlie, who has come to the countryside to mend his reputation and learn how to be his father's heir. He is working out his past as she is taking control of her future. The author, Megan Walker, says, quote, "I believe wholeheartedly that once you know a person's whole life story, you can't help but feel love for them. In this story, I loved giving Charlie and Roz misconceptions about each other and then letting each prove the other wrong." And here's a brief excerpt of the scene where Roz is teaching herself to swim as item 1 on her list, and it's not going well. "I flailed my arms trying to reach the surface when out of nowhere a firm hand grabbed my arm. The man hoisted me higher until my head broke the surface again. My eyes burned, as did my chest, and I sucked in air, coughing and choking and gasping for more. Then he tugged me along with sharp, measured breaths as he swam us both until my feet could touch the earth again." Coming next spring, A Heart Worth Stealing is a Regency romance about an independent woman who hires a private eye to help her track down the thief of her late father's pocket watch when the local authorities prove incompetent, but she discovers a more frightening plot against her. This author, Joanna Barker, says of this book, Ginny and Jack are forced to work together as they solve a mystery. They are complete opposites, but when faced with a common problem, they see each other differently and learn to trust and love. Trust is such an important foundation for any relationship. Placing them in a little bit of danger is also a fun way to make them realize their feelings for each other. Also next spring, we'll publish The Art of Love and Lies, which is a Victorian romance about a free-spirited artist who is an expert in reproducing parlor versions of classic masterpieces, who teams up with a no-nonsense detective when she sees her own reproduction painting on display in an art exhibition after someone stole the original, and the evidence casts suspicion on her. Rebecca Anderson, the author, says, quote, "Sometimes we fall in love with people who show us the world in a new light. In this story, Rosanna opens Inspector Harrison's eyes to things he's never imagined. He works daily in an art exhibition, but he knows nothing of fine art, and she teaches him, in serious and in playful ways, to look at the world with a new viewpoint." Games in a Ballroom is a recent Regency where Olivia has resigned herself to never finding a love match. The titled men her father deems acceptable are at best boring, or at worst are as brutish as her father, and only looking to marry her for wealth. With her future looking dismal, Olivia decides to enjoy the last few months of freedom with her childhood friends, including the handsome Emerson, whose flirtatious teasing stirs up feelings she knows she cannot entertain. Emerson has been in love with Olivia since childhood, but he is untitled. To get around her father's edict, Emerson begins a season-long game of ballroom tag as an excuse to stay near the woman he loves. The author, Gentry Flint, says of her romance writing, quote, "I love exploring different love languages like humor, touch, gifts, and attention, showing the adventure and the discovery and what someone is willing to do to obtain love." The Valet's Secret was recently published and is by Josie S. Kilpack, who has written many romances for us. This is a Regency Cinderella story where Rebecca Parker is a widow and is now working as a serving girl. She's passionately kissed by a valet who nearly knocks her over with his speeding horse. She spends time with the Earl's valet, but while working in the kitchen during a fancy dinner party, she sees something strange. The valet she kissed, is sitting at the right hand of the Baroness. She realizes that Mr. Henry is not the Earl's valet. He is the Earl, Kenneth Winterton. And since this is a twist on Cinderella, there's a Lady Martin acting as the fairy godmother in the story, who believes Rebecca is the perfect match for her friend Lord Winterton, despite their vastly different social status, and orchestrates a meeting at a ball where Kenneth can declare his intentions and hopefully convince Rebecca to marry him. I wanted to mention the Spring 23 young adult title written by an author, Julie Wright, who has written several proper romances for us, such as Lies Jane Austen Told Me, and in that genre, as with this YA, she's incredibly adept in helping us understand the elements of why certain people find connection in each other. Journal entry. Heading to school. I know what everyone will say. There goes the girl who tried to kill herself. This is the premise of Swimming in a Sea of Stars, a novel about teen mental health issues, particularly teens struggling with depression and suicidal ideation, with an emphasis on how healing and hope can come from small acts of kindness, and as such, every person can matter. And one more YA title, this is coming next spring, and is The Dark Side of Relationships with important messages for teen readers. Beauty Reborn is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast about healing from the trauma of emotional and sexual abuse through the lens of a well-known fairy tale. The story implies sexual abuse, but the incident is not explicitly described, and the story explores the difficulty of learning to trust again, as well as noting that the road to empowerment is an ongoing journey, not a simple happily ever after ending. The author, Elizabeth Loham, draws from her own experience as a sexual abuse survivor and identifies in the story the red flags associated with a manipulative and/or abusive relationship. Let me briefly mention a few new titles in historical fiction featuring strong women protagonists. Under the Cover of Mercy is one of the few books available about the incredible story of Edith Cavell, who was a British nurse during World War I and a pioneer in modern nursing care, who helped hundreds of Allied soldiers escape from German-occupied Belgium once they came into her care after being wounded. Cavell was arrested, court-martialed, and executed by firing squad, and her death became a rallying cry used by the Allies to gain support for the war effort against the brutality of the Germans. If you Google her name in World War I propaganda, you'll see recruitment posters which were very effective in getting more men to join the fight. The story is told from the point of view of Edith Cavell and her friend and a fellow nurse. These are two titles just out this fall. The Opera Sisters is based on the real story of the Cook sisters, who smuggled valuables out of Nazi Germany to finance a daring operation to save Jews in the closing days before the start of war. Viewed as looking more middle-aged than their youthful 30s, the women are able to pass through SS checkpoints at the border by guards who write them off as eccentric and innocuous characters, which they use to their advantage to divert any suspicion as they exit Germany, dripping in jewels which they did not possess when they entered the country. In the Shadow of a Queen is written by the author of The Paper Daughters of Chinatown, and is the story of the progressive, strong-willed daughter of Queen Victoria, Princess Louise, who lived under the thumb of her mother's rigid rules. But as she matured, Louise is able to chart her own course in life, and became an established sculptor, championed causes for women's rights, and was the first royal since the Tudors to marry outside of royalty, all against the wishes of her mother, who was determined to avoid any hint of scandal. Ebook review copies are available on Edelweiss and NetGalley, and on Edelweiss you'll always find more backlist titles than NetGalley. Our books are sold as ebooks on all popular platforms. Thank you, and feel free to reach out to me directly for any additional product information at ilevine@shadowmountain.com.